Hello everyone. First of all, I just want to thank you for all the support you have shown me in the previous videos, and if you're enjoying these videos and you're finding it useful, then I highly recommend enrolling into my Tailwind CSS course. So far we have over 15,000 students and we're getting good reviews about this course. So I highly recommend checking it out if you want to learn Tailwind CSS in detail. So if you want to enroll into this course, you can find the link in the description. So now let's move on to the spacing group classes. First of all, let's start with padding. This is very important because we use it a lot in our projects. So it's going to be quite simple as well. Just as you can see from the documentation, P0 will give it a padding of 0 pixels all around, so it will do top, left, right, and bottom. PPX will give it exactly 1 pixels, and as you can see, all of the other properties, as you can see from the documentation, is quite clear. So the higher padding, the basically more padding it will give you it, and you can also specify specific paddings as well. So you can use also PX and PY. So PX basically gives it horizontal padding, and PY gives it vertical padding. So it will only do left and right if you do horizontal, and it will do top and bottom if you're doing vertical. So PY is vertical, PX is horizontal. You can also specify the specific side you want to give padding for. For example, padding top 6, that will give it basically a padding top of 1.5 rem, and you can do padding right and padding left, padding bottom. Basically, you can specify the specific side that you want to add padding to. So now let's move on to let's see what other, okay, so we have, so these are some examples over here. We have, as you can see, padding top 6. You can see that that area that is highlighted with those stripes, that shows you the padding right there. So padding top 6, you can see that there's a padding added to the top. Padding right gives you some padding on the right, and yeah, self-explanatory basically. Now we can see the examples for padding horizontal, PX8, that basically gives you a padding of 8 on both horizontal sides, so left and right. And you have vertical padding, which as you can see is only for top and bottom. And normal padding, as you can see over here from the illustration, padding is actually applied to all of the sides just by using padding and then the number you want to add. And to make it responsive is very simple. We just have to specify the specific device screen, and then we can add the padding for it. So we can have multiple paddings for different devices. Okay, so now let's move on to margin. Margin is also, these group of classes are very important as well because we used it a lot in our projects, and you will be using it a lot inside your future Tailwind projects. So again, it's going to be pretty much just like the padding, so there's no point of covering it. I mean, each class has its properties on the right. It's basically very well explained, so you can check out the documentation in detail if you want to check it out, if you want to see the details of this. But anyway, we can move on to using these margins basically. So the difference between margins is, again, everything is pretty much going to be the same, as like very similar to padding. The only difference is padding is applied to inside the element, and margin is applied to the outside the element. So the margin would basically give a margin between the current element and the elements basically that it's around. So any elements are close to it, so we'll basically put in margins between them. Whereas padding, it will actually be applied to the element itself, and it will be actually padded inside. So the element will actually be padded. So yeah, that's pretty much the same. So if we go down to these adding margins to a single side, we can basically use MT8. As you can see, applies margin to the top. Margin right, we'll give it margin right, basically self-explanatory. No point really discussing the details. I mean, yeah, it's very self-explanatory. And you have horizontal margin again. It gives it only applies to the left and right sides. It gives it a margin only on the left and right, and margin vertical only to the top and bottom. And yeah, it's pretty much the same. And if you want to make it responsive, you can specify the device screen, and then you can also add in the specific margins that you want to use. The important thing for margins as well is that you can have negative margins. So let's say there's a lot of margin between two elements, or let's say the other element has a lot of margin, and that causes the current element to be further away from it.
we can actually apply negative values, and that will allow us basically to shift the current element and make it closer to the other element by removing some of the margin that is actually applied. So it's very simple. We just specify negative before the actual. So if we were to have margin x, so margin horizontal 72, in this case we can do minus before the actual class, and that will actually basically apply its inverse. So it actually removes the margin, not adds it. So this also applies some of these classes that we have just talked about. So let's make a new div, and let's give it a class of background color. Let's do background color red with a shade of 500, and let's put in some text just to see how everything looks over here. Okay, and inside it we're gonna have so h1 with hello, and now we're going to give it some margin. So you can see that with the hello is going to have some margin. So we'll give it a margin of let's see, 12. And as you can see, the actual h1 now has a margin on the left, on the top, on the right, and on the bottom. And let's actually have another h1, so we can basically see we'll have two h1s inside this div, just to see this the margin. As you can see now, we have the first margin has the first element has margins and the second one doesn't. And as you can see, the if we remove the margin from the first elements, they will be basically stuck together. And if we add margin horizontal, for example, then for the first element using mx, for example, 12, and as you can see, the margin is only applied horizontally. And if we do my, then it will be applied vertically. And if we want to apply it on all sides, we just do M12, and that will apply it for all sides basically. Say we want to reduce the margin from using the H1 and shift it up, we can apply negative margin. So we can do minus margin top, and we can do let's say 12, and that will basically shift it up, and it will make it on the same level as well. So that's if we want to apply negative margins. Now let's apply some padding. So let's give the H1 a padding of, for example, padding 6, and that should basically give it some padding. And let's instead of margin 12, let's do padding 12. As you can see, we have now because before when we used margin, the margin was being applied to the outside elements, so that's why we had the white space. But now in this case, it's actually being applied inside the element, and that's why there's no white space anymore, and the actual padding is applied rather than the margin. Okay, so that pretty much summarizes the padding and margin group classes. We can now continue on to the next section.